Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Microsoft License and Mobility through Software Assurance for Windows Server Applications on the AWS Cloud. Before we get started, I want to mention that you have joined today's webinar muted and can listen in using your computer speakers or your telephone. You will find both options in the attendee panel on the right side of your screen. During the presentation, we invite you to write in your questions using the questions box on your panel. These will be collected and we will address some of them at the end of today's presentation. With that, I'd like to get started. First, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Lisa Williams, Senior Business Development Manager here at Amazon Web Services. In her role, Lisa is focused on managing the business relationship between AWS and Microsoft. So with that, let's begin.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar. Our goal today is to share the details of Microsoft's new License Mobility Program and how this will benefit AWS's customers. So let's just jump right in and give a bit of the overview of the program. So Microsoft recognizes that their customers want to leverage their existing licenses while taking advantage of all of the benefits of the cloud and AWS. So in July of 2011, Microsoft announced that they would extend the rights of their volume license programs such as their EAs, Select, Open Select, all of their volume license programs, that they would extend the benefits to allow customers to move their Windows Server applications to service providers such as AWS. So some of the benefits for customers, and what does this mean for Microsoft customers and for AWS customers, is that now customers have the flexibility to run those server application licenses on-premise or on AWS. They have the option to run on AWS, allowing customers to take full advantage of all the benefits of the AWS infrastructure platform. It also adds more value to customer software assurance program. So it's further benefit for the money that Microsoft customers have already spent on their software assurance programs through their volume licensing. So and also another big benefit is that without any additional licensing terms or fees, customers can begin to deploy those licenses immediately. So there are no other additional license agreements to sign or terms to sign up for. So what is License Mobility with Software Assurance? The official program called License Mobility through Software Assurance, and we can get into a little bit of the details. And as I mentioned before, customers can now deploy their server applications in a shared workload environment provided by AWS. Where before, customers' licensed workloads had to be deployed physically on those customer servers running on-premise, they can now be deployed on AWS instances. The primary requirement is those instances must be covered by active software assurance. And so this became available in July of 2011. So just a word about Microsoft volume license programs with software assurance. So anyone who's participating on this call that's a Microsoft customer, I'm sure that you are very familiar, someone in your organization is very familiar with Microsoft's volume licensing programs. It really allows customers to purchase licenses at a discount, and along with that, you can purchase a maintenance program that provides customers upgrade rights to servers and desktop applications. So this software assurance now includes the rights to run those server applications in a third-party hosted environment such as AWS. So the eligible software applications include SQL Server Standard, SQL Server Enterprise, SharePoint, Exchange, Dynamics, Link Server, System Center Server. There are a few others that are included that are not listed here, but if you go to your Microsoft Volume License Agreement and you look at the product use rights, any of the products that are listed there, if they have a little annotation that says LM, that means that they are eligible for this licensed mobility program. So it is important to point out that licensed mobility does not include the Windows Server operating system or any of the business productivity applications such as Microsoft Office. So whatever workload or server application moved to AWS will be required to run on an AWS Windows instance. So if you want to know which OSs are supported, you can find that on our webpage. So you can bring those server applications over to run on AWS, but you cannot bring your Windows license onto AWS. You must run that on a Windows instance, an AWS Windows instance. So just a few more details about the program. So how does it actually work? Microsoft made this really pretty simple for customers, the math pretty easy, in that one server application license may be assigned to one AWS instance, no size limit. So, for example, one SharePoint server license can be assigned to one AWS instance. So there's also the option, if you have a per proc license, if you're running SQL and you bought a per proc license, the guidance is that you must have a 2-proc license, and that can be assigned to one AWS instance, no minimum, no maximum. So if you have a server-based license, you can simply assign that to an AWS instance. If you have or are going to be buying a proc license, you need to acquire a 2-proc license, and you can assign that to one AWS instance. So hopefully pretty straightforward. In the case of a server license, folks may know that you need to have what's called a CAL, so a client application license. And again, Microsoft has made this pretty easy for customers in that those CALs can be directly transferred to AWS. So if I had an environment where I was running SQL Standard and I had 50 CALs, whether they were user CALs or device CALs, those CALs will transfer over to AWS just exactly as if you were running on-premise. If I added users or I added devices, then I would need to buy additional CALs. But it's exactly analogous to running on-premise. Another one of the details is the 90-day rule. And this is nothing new to AWS. This is part of Microsoft's standard licensing, but it does require that 90-day instances, when you load up an instance on AWS, it must sit in that region for a minimum of 90 days. And a region can be defined by any of the AWS regions within a 4-hour time difference. So, for example, US East and US West are considered one region. If you were to put these up in Singapore, we'd have to sit there for 90 days. In Ireland for 90 days. In Brazil for 90 days. After that 90 days, you can move it to another location, but then it must remain there again for another 90 days. So there is a customer verification license process. So all customers that are using license mobility through software assurance, Microsoft asks that they complete a license verification form. You can find that form on the Microsoft site. You can find that form on the AWS site. If you go up and you look for the license mobility page on AWS, you'll find a link to that form there. So it's pretty simple. Fill out that form, follow the instructions on the form, forward that to Microsoft. The good news is that you don't have to wait for that form to be processed. You can begin to deploy those licenses immediately while you wait for that verification form to be processed. So having shared some of the details of the program, I thought it might be interesting to take a look at some case studies where there are some real-life customers and companies and organizations that are using licensed mobility. The first one I'd like to share with you is recovery.gov. So in 2009, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Program was enacted by the federal government, and recovery.gov is a public website whose goal it is to provide taxpayers with a user-friendly tool to track how and where these recovery funds are spent. So the project started out as a platform for test and development and then quickly moved into a production environment. The migration took only 22 days, and recovery.gov has gone on the record to say that they expect this particular implementation to save them approximately $750,000 within the first 12 months. This particular solution was built on AWS Windows Server instances. It's using SharePoint, using SQL, and Forefront, all hosted on AWS. So the site has been given many awards, including the 2009 Merit Award, the 2010 Gold Addy Award for website design. So it's won a lot of awards and is a great example of running Windows and Windows Server applications on AWS. So the second one I'd like to share with you is Amazon.com. So Amazon.com, first of all, I will say Amazon Web Services, we are part of Amazon.com, but Amazon uses SharePoint to manage their intranet site, their documents, their publishing process, share ideas, capture different types of collaborations between different teams. And Amazon.com treated AWS as if we were a separate company. So we went through the full security view with Amazon.com just as if we were another third party. And so Amazon.com has gone on record to say that the results from this particular project is that they have reduced their procurement time down to 6 weeks. And so what was really holding Amazon up in terms of furthering their SharePoint deployment was buying new hardware. So we reduced that procurement time and cut their annual costs down by 22%. So I'd like to wrap up with that. I'd like to point you to some more information and resources that you can find on our site, on Microsoft's site. If there are any questions that we didn't answer here, you will find an email alias. I really encourage you to ask us, ask your Microsoft rep, ask your reseller, and everyone is very excited about this program. Happy to help get started. So with that, why don't we open this up and see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Lisa. Now we're going to take a couple questions from the audience. Please submit your questions now, and we will start with one that was previously submitted here. Question comes here, Lisa. How does the CPU-based licensing work, for example, with SQL Server Enterprise?
Yes, so that I mentioned on one of the earlier slides. So that is what we refer to as the per processor license. And so you must have a minimum of a 2-proc license, and that can be whether that's SQL Standard or SQL Enterprise, and you can run that on any AWS instance. So a 2-proc license with software assurance, run it on any size Amazon instance.
Another question here, does this include licenses obtained through Microsoft's BizSpark program?
Yes, I am really happy to say that in September of 2011, we announced support for Microsoft and their BizSpark customers. So if you are a BizSpark customer, you go through this sign-up process, you put in your BizSpark ID, it will be verified by Microsoft, it comes back to us, and you can run your BizSpark licenses on AWS with no Windows licensing fees. So, yes, 100% support for the BizSpark program.
What is the situation concerning terminal server software?
Yes. So terminal services, now referred to as remote desktop services, or RDS. And in order to run RDS services on a Windows-based instance, customers must have not only the CALs that they had on-premise, but they now also must have something called a SAL, a subscriber access license. And so it's just like that CAL, but it's a subscriber access license referred to as a SAL, lots of acronyms when you're talking about Microsoft. And that SAL has to be purchased through the company that is providing the service. So in this case, that would be AWS. At this point in time, AWS does not offer SAL. So we hope that we will soon, and so I would just invite those customers that are interested in remote desktop services on Windows, on AWS, to stay tuned for a SAL-based solution.
Thank you. Another question here is, how do my Microsoft CALs translate to AWS using this Microsoft License Mobility?
So this was covered on one of the earlier slides as well. So if you have a server-based license for SQL or for SharePoint or any of the eligible server applications that are covered through License Mobility, you can bring those CALs over. No additional CALs to buy unless, of course, you are adding devices or you're adding users. So exactly like it would be on-premise. So in my new deployment on AWS, if I have the same number of users that I had when I was running on-premise, those CALs translate straight over. If, in the case of this new project, I add users, then of course I would have to add and buy more CALs. So exactly like I would when I was running on-premise.
Another question here is, may I use my licenses of Windows Server that I already own on the AWS platform through the License Mobility program?
Well, the answer to that is no. So License Mobility through Software Assurance is for server applications only. It does not include the Windows license. So you will have to run your workload on an AWS Windows instance. So maybe that will change in the future, but for now, that is the program.
Another question here is, how do I find out if my licenses of SharePoint are even eligible, and then what is my next step? Question here. So
your licenses would be eligible if you have software assurance on them. And you know, not everyone knows, I suspect, how their software is bought, but whoever is buying your software or managing that Microsoft Volume license could answer that question. Your reseller, these licenses are purchased through what's called a Microsoft Large Account Reseller, a LAR, another acronym. And so if they have software assurance on them, they will be eligible. So my suggestion would be to talk to whoever your internal software procurement person is, or potentially your large account reseller.
The last question here is, what if I don't have, the questioner asks, what if I don't have current software assurance? I assume they know they don't have software assurance that's current.
Right.
What's their next steps?
So you can add software assurance. It'll be prorated depending upon when you buy it, but you can add software assurance to a license, or what we've seen other customers do is acquire a new license and acquire it with software assurance, and then you know that you have it for sure. So for some customers that seems more straightforward to just go buy a new license, make sure it already has software assurance, but you can add software assurance to an existing license. So hope that helps.
Another question came through here is if they could run Office 365 on the AWS platform using the License Mobility?
Office 360 does not run on AWS. That's a Microsoft service. You can buy that and run that on Microsoft. Does not run on AWS. Not an option, not an offering on AWS.
Okay. Well, that wraps up today's presentation. Thank you, Lisa, and thank you to everybody for attending today's webinar. We'll send a follow-up email with a link to this recorded presentation, as well as you will find an archived version of this presentation on the Microsoft microsite located on AWS's website. On behalf of Amazon Web Services and our presenters, I'd like to thank you for joining today to learn more about Microsoft License Mobility for Windows Server applications on the AWS cloud.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks, everyone.